Let me tell you exactly what happened the morning. The regional power company sent 3 trucks, a crew supervisor, and a hydraulic bolt cutter to the end of my driveway, and why the HOA president was standing there in her bathrobe at 6:15 in the morning, screaming into a phone that nobody on the other end was answering. I was already awake. I had been awake since 5. I had a fresh thermos of black coffee, my site plans rolled out on the kitchen table, and every camera on the property running clean feeds to an encrypted server in my garage. I watched the whole thing on a monitor, the size of a laptop screen. The crew foreman, a stocky guy named Daryl with a safety vest and absolutely zero patience for drama, walked up to the ornate wrought iron gate the HOA had installed across my recorded utility easement exactly 11 days prior. He looked at it the way a surgeon looks at a benign cyst, clinical, dispassionate. He said 4 words into his radio, stepped back, and his crew brought up the cutter. The gate, which had cost, according to documents I had already obtained, approximately $14,000 of HOA reserve funds, lasted about 40 seconds. I took a sip of my coffee. I pressed save on the recording, and I thought, this is what happens when you build a wall across something that was never yours to block. I moved to the property in late March of that year. I'll call it the Creekside parcel, which is the name it carried on the county plat map, and the name I used in every document from the moment I signed the deed. I am a licensed civil engineer. I spent 11 years doing infrastructure work, pipelines, utility corridors, easement coordination, before transitioning to private consulting. I understand at a molecular level what an easement is, what it means, and what rights it carries. I understand it the way a cardiologist understands the rhythm of a heartbeat. I was not moving to Creekside for excitement. I had come off a brutal 3-year stretch, a project that went sideways in litigation, a marriage that didn't survive the stress, and a health scare that put me in a hospital for 4 days while my blood pressure tried to have a conversation I wasn't ready for. I wanted quiet. I wanted acreage. I wanted a property where the closest neighbor was far enough away that I couldn't hear their television. What I got instead was Sandra Mercer. Sandra was the HOA president of the Creekside Pines Homeowners Association. She showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning, 2 days after I moved in, before I had unpacked the second bedroom. She was dressed like she was going to a condo board meeting in 1987, pressed blazer, pearl earrings, a leather portfolio under one arm, and the expression of someone who has never once in her adult life been told no by anyone who meant it. She did not knock. She rang the doorbell 3 times in rapid succession, the way someone rings a doorbell when they believe you work for them. I opened the door. "Mr. Callahan," she said, pronouncing my name like it was a minor inconvenience. "Sandra Mercer, President, Creekside Pines HOA. I need to walk the property with you today and complete the standard new resident intake form. Section 4.2 of the Community Bylaws requires that new residents provide the board with keyed access for emergency safety inspections. I'll need a copy of your house key, your garage code, and the contact number for your alarm company." I looked at her for a long moment. I looked at the portfolio. I looked at the pearl earrings. "No," I said. She blinked. It was the blink of a person who has just heard a word they do not recognize in their native language. "I'm sorry. No. I won't be providing keys, codes, or alarm contacts. The easement rights and access protocols for this parcel are governed by county ordinance and the recorded deed restrictions, not by internal HOA bylaws. If there is a legitimate safety emergency, you call 911 same as everyone else." I held eye contact. I did not raise my voice. I did not smile. Sandra Mercer's jaw tightened by about 3 millimeters. She clicked her pen without clicking her pen. "If you understand what I mean, That involuntary microtension of someone who has just decided you are an enemy. "You'll be hearing from the board," she said. "I'm sure I will," I said. "Have a good morning." I closed the door. I went back to my coffee. And I started a document on my laptop that I titled simply Creekside HOA Event Log. First entry, Tuesday, March 23rd, 9:14 a.m. S. Mercer, HOA President, visited unannounced. Requested keys, garage code, alarm contact. Request denied. Verbal threat of board action issued. I had a feeling I was going to need a lot of pages. The HOA portal notifications started 4 days later. I logged in on a Saturday morning and found 17 messages queued in my resident inbox. Not 17 messages accumulated over time. 17 messages generated in a 48-hour window. The first was dated the morning after our doorstep exchange. They escalated in both dollar amount and creative fiction with each passing day. Violation notice, exterior paint noncompliance. Fine, $250. My house was the same color it had been for the previous 6 years under the prior owner, a color that appeared in the HOA's own approved palette document as sandstone beige. Approved. I had verified this before closing, specifically because I had done my homework. Violation notice, unapproved landscaping modification. Fine, $250. I had pulled 3 dead shrubs from the south side of the driveway and stacked them neatly in a contractor bag near the road for pickup. Standard yard maintenance. Violation notice, utility connection non-disclosure. Fine, $500. This one was particularly creative. It alleged that I had failed to disclose unauthorized utility infrastructure modifications within 30 days of occupancy. I had done nothing to the utility infrastructure. The utility lines that crossed my property existed on a recorded easement predating the HOA's founding documents by 16 years. I printed every single notice. I hole-punched them and put them in a 3-ring binder labeled HOA violations. Substantive response required. 0. I printed the relevant county ordinances and deed restrictions and inserted them as tabbed reference pages. The binder went on my kitchen table next to the coffee maker. It was my morning reading. On the 9th day, a patrol car came down my driveway. Not flashing lights, not urgent, just a white county sheriff's cruiser moving slowly over the gravel. I walked out to meet it. The deputy who climbed out was named Garrett. He was somewhere in his late 40s, with a weathered face and the unhurried manner of someone who has seen most of the human drama available in a rural county. He shook my hand, introduced himself, and did not immediately tell me why he was there. He looked at the property for a moment, at the acreage, the tree line, the creek glinting at the back of the lot. "Nice piece of land," he said. "Thank you." "I think so. HOA called in a welfare check," he said, claimed they had reason to believe the property might have an unoccupied structure being used for illegal storage. He paused. "I'm looking at this property right now, and I'm seeing a well-maintained home with a new resident who appears to be doing just fine." "That's accurate," I said. He nodded slowly. "Sandra Mercer file a complaint." "She filed 17, I said, "in the portal over 4 days. Deputy Garrett exhaled through his nose. It was a very specific exhale, the exhale of a man who has had this conversation in varying forms many times before. "Mr. Callahan," he said carefully, "I'm going to tell you something that I'm telling you as a courtesy, not as any kind of official advisory. Sandra Mercer has a history in this township of using official channels in ways that are, let's say, creative. She has called in welfare checks, code complaints, and noise violations as instruments rather than genuine concerns. I can't do much about what she files. But you seem like a methodical person." He looked at the camera mounted above my garage door, then at the one on the corner post. Then at the one angled toward the easement strip along the eastern property line. "Keep good records," he said. "Already am," I said. He nodded, got back in his cruiser, crunched back down the gravel driveway. I watched him go, then turned and looked at the eastern property line, at the utility easement strip that ran along it like a seam in a document, 20 feet wide. Recorded on every plat map, going back to 1987. That afternoon, I drove to the county surveyor's office. I requested certified copies of every recorded document touching the Creekside parcel, the original plat, all easement agreements, the HOA's founding declaration, and every amendment thereto. I paid the copy fees in cash and walked out with a manila envelope thick enough to use as a doorstop. Back home, I spent 4 hours reading. Then I started building. Over the next week, I installed what I think of as a hardened perimeter documentation system. 4 additional cameras, weatherproof, motion-triggered with night vision and a direct cellular upload to an encrypted cloud server, independent of my home internet. Boundary markers, surveyor-grade, orange flagged, positioned at every recorded corner of the easement strip with GPS coordinates logged. A motion sensor at the easement entry point that triggered both a camera and a time-stamped log entry on my server. Nothing dramatic, nothing aggressive. Just the built environment of a man who understands what documentation means in a legal dispute. Sandra apparently decided to test this system on a Thursday. She arrived with a man she introduced, through my video intercom, as a licensed structural inspector. He had a clipboard and uncomfortable eyes. She wanted access to the crawl space pursuant to Section 4.2 safety protocols. I responded through the intercom in my normal speaking voice. For the structural inspector, county ordinance requires that any inspector accessing private property produce a valid county-issued inspection order. Additionally, my security system requires biometric registration for all approved vendors. Please complete the registration form I'm going to slide under the gate, and I'll contact the county to verify your inspection authorization while you wait. There was a very long silence. The inspector leaned toward Sandra and said, audibly enough for the microphone to capture it clearly, "Ma'am, I can't do this. This is a liability issue. If he's got a camera system and county ordinances and he's asking for documentation, I'm not going in there without a court order." He left. Sandra stood at my gate for 2 additional minutes. I have the footage. She is looking directly into the camera with an expression that, if I were being generous, I might describe as recalibrating. She left without saying another word. Event log entry, Thursday, April 14th. 11:22 a.m. S. Mercer arrived with unidentified individual claiming inspector status. Request for access denied pending documentation. Individual departed. Interaction recorded on all systems. Duration, 7 minutes. There is something meditative if you have the right kind of mind about forensic document work at 11 o'clock at night. The house is quiet. The coffee is hot. Every window shows nothing but dark fields and a blinking cursor. I had the surveyor's documents on one side of the table and the HOA's financial disclosures on the other. Because HOAs incorporated in this state are required to provide annual financial summaries to residents upon written request. And I had made that request on my first day of formal HOA membership. The budget summaries Sandra sent were PDF files, not spreadsheets, which told me immediately that she did not want anyone sorting columns. I converted them manually. I built a spreadsheet. I started lining up line items across 3 fiscal years. There was a vendor category labeled infrastructure maintenance and easement management. In year 1, this line item was approximately $4,000. In year 2, $11,000. In year 3, the year before I bought the Creekside parcel, It had jumped to $63,000. The vendor name attached to these payments was listed in the disclosure as CPM Services, LLC. I ran CPM Services, LLC through the state business registry at midnight on a Thursday. The registered agent for CPM Services, LLC was a person named Douglas Mercer. I sat back in my chair. I looked at the ceiling for a moment. Douglas Mercer was Sandra's brother-in-law. I knew this because Sandra had mentioned him, briefly and warmly. At the first HOA new resident orientation meeting I had attended, the meeting where she had smiled at everyone and talked about community investment and protecting property values with the smooth, practiced cadence of someone who has given this speech while planning something else entirely. I pulled up the county assessor's records for the easement strip along my property. The recorded easement designated it as a utility access corridor for regional power and telecommunications. The HOA had no ownership interest, no maintenance authority, and no contractual relationship with the utility companies that used it. Zero. None. The HOA's authority ended at the property lines of the individual lots they governed. But CPM Services, LLC had been paid $63,000 over one fiscal year for easement management on a strip of land the HOA had no legal authority to manage. I opened a new document. I started a timeline. 2 weeks later, a woman named Evelyn appeared at my driveway gate at 7 in the evening. She was in her 60s, small, wearing gardening gloves she hadn't taken off, and she had the look of someone who has been working up courage for longer than they'd like to admit. "You're the new one on the Creekside parcel," she said. "I am," I said. "Marcus Callahan. Evelyn Hargrove, I'm on Sycamore Loop about a quarter-mile east." She hesitated. "I heard what happened with the inspector. Word gets around." She reached into the front pocket of her gardening apron and produced a folded envelope. "I kept these from the board meeting in February, before you moved in." She held out the envelope. "Sandra doesn't know I have copies." Nobody was supposed to keep minutes from that session. She called it a closed executive session. No minutes, no record. But I write everything down by hand out of habit. Old schoolteacher habit. I took the envelope carefully. "You should know," Evelyn said, "the fence across the easement, she's been planning it for months. Douglas's company has a contract to maintain it. Charge the utility company access fees." I looked at her. She was going to charge the utility company to access a legally recorded easement they've held for 37 years. That's what the contract said. I wrote it down. She pointed at the envelope. After she left, I made copies of the handwritten notes, photographed each page, and uploaded them to my server. Then I called my attorney. Her name was Patricia Osai, and she was a land rights and real estate attorney who had, according to her firm's bio, spent 7 years in the state AG's office before going private. She listened to my summary on the phone without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "How organized is your documentation? Binders, server backups, time-stamped originals, and a handwritten corroborating witness account." A short pause. "Can you come in Friday morning?" "I'll be there at 8, I said. Patricia reviewed everything on Friday. She was precise and still in the way of someone who does not waste words when the words need to count. At the end of the meeting, she said, "The fence is an unlawful obstruction of a recorded easement. The financial arrangement constitutes a potential breach of fiduciary duty, and depending on how the invoices were documented, possibly wire fraud. We need to notify the utility company in writing, today, and file a quiet title action to formally establish that the HOA has no authority over that easement strip. I'm also going to draft a demand letter that is going to make Sandra Mercer's attorney very uncomfortable." She leaned forward slightly. "And Marcus, mirror everything. Tonight, multiple servers. Multiple physical locations." I drove home. I mirrored everything to 3 servers, a physical external drive kept at Patricia's office, and a second drive deposited in a fireproof safe at my brother's house 60 miles away. Then I made myself dinner. I ate slowly. I watched the cameras. I waited. The HOA portal locked my account on a Monday morning. No warning, no notification, no explanation. I received a brief email, not through the portal, through my personal address, which meant someone had pulled it from my resident file, informing me that my account had been suspended pending review of ongoing violations. There was no appeal process listed. No contact name, no case number. I forwarded it to Patricia immediately. Patricia, to her credit, did not panic. She simply drafted a formal written demand under state open records statute for all HOA communications relating to my account suspension, all violation notices issued in the prior 60 days, and all board resolutions passed in executive session for the prior fiscal year. She sent it certified mail and by process server simultaneously to the HOA's registered address and to the personal addresses of all 5 board members. 2 days later, a structural hazard notice appeared taped to my front door. It alleged, with no inspection and no inspector's signature, that the foundation of my property showed signs of subsidence, creating a neighborhood safety emergency, citing, specifically, a section of the HOA's bylaws that authorized emergency abatement of hazardous structures. That same afternoon, a county wellness officer showed up. Not Deputy Garrett this time, someone I hadn't met, a younger officer who had clearly been dispatched on a call he hadn't expected to involve a property that looked entirely normal. He stood in my driveway and looked at the house, which had passed a full professional structural inspection 5 months prior, a copy of which I had in my documentation binder, and then looked at the notice. "Do you have any reason to believe your foundation is compromised?" he asked me. "The structural inspection report says it's in excellent condition for its age," I said. I handed him a copy. He read it. He looked at the HOA notice again. He sighed the sigh of a man who has been deployed to deliver an absurdity. "Have a good afternoon," he said, and left. The surveillance vehicle appeared the following week. A dark gray sedan, mid-90s, no identifying markings, parked on the county road at the end of my drive. It was there in the morning. It was there in the evening. Sometimes there were 2 people in it, sometimes 1. My cameras captured clear footage of the license plate. I ran it through a reverse search, registered to a Douglas Mercer of a street address 2 townships over. Sandra's brother-in-law was personally surveilling my property. I photographed the car. I logged the timestamps. I captured the footage. I sent everything to Patricia and to Deputy Garrett in separate emails with the subject line, "Possible intimidation documented." Garrett's reply came 20 minutes later, noted, "I'll make a point of driving that road." The surveillance car did not appear the next day. But the psychological weight of knowing it had been, there was something I filed away deliberately. The way you file away evidence that someone is losing their composure and starting to improvise. Improvising people make mistakes. The emergency board session was announced by a notice slid under every resident's door, except mine. Evelyn texted me a photo of hers at 9 in the morning on a Wednesday. The notice informed residents that the board would be convening an emergency closed session to address an immediate structural and safety threat posed by the infrastructure on the Creekside parcel, and authorize emergency remediation actions pursuant to Article 6, Section 2 of the Creekside Pines HOA Declaration. Article 6, Section 2 did not say what Sandra apparently believed it said. Patricia had read it to me verbatim 2 weeks prior. It authorized emergency maintenance of common areas, not private parcels, and only after a licensed inspector's written certification. Sandra had neither. What she had instead was a contractor, the same contractor she had hired through CPM Services LLC, for the fence, and what appeared to be a plan to use the emergency abatement provision as legal cover for forcing access to my property. I read the notice on my phone, standing in my kitchen with all 6 cameras running. I looked at the window that faced east, toward the utility easement strip where the fence stood, wrought iron and freshly welded, blocking 20 feet of legally recorded access corridor. I checked every camera angle. I adjusted the motion sensitivity on the easement sensor. I confirmed the server upload was running live and continuous. I fully charged my phone. I poured a last cup of coffee. I turned off the kitchen light. I sat in the dark house and listened to the creek at the back of the property, running clean and steady over the rocks the way it had been running since long before the HOA existed. And I waited. They came at 9 o'clock. The cameras picked them up on the county road first, 3 vehicles moving in convoy. A flatbed truck carrying a portable generator and what I could identify, from the silhouette on the night vision feed, as an angle grinder and a hydraulic fence post remover. Sandra's personal SUV, which I recognized from the HOA welcome packet photo, and a crew cab pickup with a magnetic company logo on the door. They turned down my driveway without hesitation. I pressed record on every system simultaneously. I activated the exterior floodlights on a 30-second delay. I wanted them deep enough into the driveway that retreat felt less obvious than confrontation. Then I sat at the intercom panel, which gave me a live 2-way audio feed to the speaker mounted at the driveway gate, and I watched the feeds on my monitor. Sandra stepped out of the SUV first. She was dressed, inexplicably, in the same pressed blazer she had worn on day 1. The contractor, a heavy-set man in a hard hat who looked like he had been given a job description that did not include criminal conspiracy, climbed out of the crew cab and began unloading the angle grinder with the methodical movements of someone who intends to work. I pressed the intercom button. "Good evening," I said. My voice came through the exterior speaker at normal conversational volume. On the feed, I watched Sandra's head snap toward the speaker. "This property is under continuous video surveillance. All activity is being recorded, time-stamped, and uploaded in real time to an off-site encrypted server. You are currently standing on private property without authorization. I'd encourage you to review the relevant county ordinances before proceeding." Sandra stepped toward the intercom camera. Up close on the monitor, her face had the bright, brittle look of someone who has been building to this moment for months and is not prepared to turn back now. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "this is an authorized emergency abatement action under Article 6, Section 2 of the HOA Declaration. You are legally required to allow." "Sandra," I said, "I'm going to stop you there. Article 6, Section 2 requires a licensed inspector's written certification of an active hazard on common area property. You have neither. What you do have is a contractor on private property at 9 p.m. with an angle grinder. I would describe this to a reasonable person as breaking and entering." "Get the cutter started," she said, not to me, to the contractor. The generator rumbled to life. The exterior lights came on, all of them, simultaneously, flooding the driveway in white light bright enough to read by. The contractor flinched. The angle grinder was in his hands. He looked at the fence, he looked at the cameras, he looked at the light, and then from the county road came the sound of gravel under tires, not one set of tires, several. Deputy Garrett had been, as it turned out, very receptive to the timeline Patricia had sent him 48 hours prior, including the text from Evelyn about the emergency board session, the documented surveillance by Douglas Mercer, and the structural hazard notice. He had, in his measured and professional way, decided to be in the area this evening. He had also, apparently, mentioned the situation to a few other deputies who happened to be coming off shift. 3 county cruisers came down the driveway behind the convoy. Their lights activated simultaneously, red and blue strobing across the tree line, across the fence, across Sandra's Blazer. Evelyn was right behind them in her Subaru, and behind her, 4 more neighbors who had received the emergency notice and decided to come see for themselves. Every phone in that cluster of neighbors came up, cameras rolling. The contractor set the angle grinder down on the flatbed with a deliberate, careful click. He crossed his arms. He was not going to prison for CPM Services, LLC. Deputy Garrett walked past Sandra without looking at her and came to my intercom. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "everything all right in there?" "Perfect," I said, "all recorded." He turned to Sandra. He spoke in the tone of someone who has all the patience in the world, because they have all the law on their side. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to explain to me the legal basis for this action." Sandra began to explain. She cited Article 6, Section 2. She cited structural emergency. She cited community safety. She did not cite any licensed inspector because there was none. She did not cite any county authorization because there was none. Garrett listened. He nodded slowly at each point. Then he said, "The Creekside parcel is not subject to HOA jurisdiction regarding structural abatement without a county-issued order." "Do you have a county-issued order?" Sandra looked at him. The Blazer seemed slightly less pressed than it had 5 minutes ago. "Detain her," Garrett said quietly to one of the other deputies. "Not arrest, not yet. Detain. Pending verification of the legal authority she claimed to have. She did not have it." The contractor gave his name, his company, and his contractor's license number to a deputy, with the cooperative energy of a man separating himself from a sinking vessel as rapidly as possible. I kept the cameras running until the last cruiser was gone, and the driveway was quiet again. 11 days later, Daryl from the regional power company came with his crew and his hydraulic bolt cutter, and he removed the wrought iron gate from the recorded easement in 40 seconds flat. The utility company had received Patricia's notice, reviewed the recorded easement documentation, confirmed that the HOA had no legal authority to obstruct the corridor, and dispatched the crew with a work order that was so clean and straightforward, it made the whole preceding months seem almost operatic in comparison. I watched it on the monitor. I drank my coffee. I pressed save. The county emergency hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the driveway confrontation. Patricia had filed for injunctive relief, quiet title confirmation on the easement, and a hearing on the HOA's financial records pending the fraud allegations. The judge assigned was the Honorable Raymond Alcott, who had, according to Patricia, a particular dislike of procedural gamesmanship and an extremely detailed memory. Sandra's attorney was a man named Philip Garrett, no relation to the deputy, who wore a $3,000 suit and opened with the kind of confidence that comes from billing by the hour. Regardless of outcome, he filed a motion to suppress the video evidence from the driveway confrontation, arguing that the recording had been obtained under circumstances designed to entrap his client. Judge Alcott looked at the motion. He looked at Philip. He set the motion down. "Counsel, the recording was made on the property of the recording party using legally installed equipment with clearly posted notification signage. The motion is denied. Move on." Philip moved on. He argued that the emergency abatement action had been authorized under the HOA's own governing documents, and that the HOA had a legitimate interest in community safety. Patricia stood up. She placed on the exhibit table in order the full video footage from the driveway, time-stamped and authenticated. The motion triggered log from the easement sensor, showing the dates and times the fence had been installed and maintained. The fake structural hazard notice. with its absent inspector signature and its non-existent certification. And Evelyn's handwritten minutes from the closed board session, the session where Sandra had authorized the fence construction, and the abatement plan in a meeting with no official record. She then placed the financial documents, the CPM Services LLC invoices, the state business registry showing Douglas Mercer as registered agent. 3 years of budget comparisons showing the escalation from $4,000 to $63,000 in the easement management line item. A signed statement from the contractor who had been in the driveway that night, who had, in the intervening weeks, retained his own attorney and made a decision about where his loyalty actually lay, confirming that he had been hired through CPM Services LLC, that he had been told the abatement was pre-authorized by the county, and that he had never been shown any county authorization document because none existed. Philip objected to the contractor's statement. Judge Alcott overruled him with the brevity of a man whose patience is a finite resource and who is managing it carefully. Patricia saved the last item for last. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit 23, a certified copy of the original utility easement recorded in 1987, predating the HOA's founding documents by 16 years, and a certified letter from the Regional Power Company confirming that the HOA obstructed this easement without authorization and that the company incurred costs in removing the obstruction costs. They intend to recover from the responsible parties. Judge Alcott picked up Exhibit 23. He read it. He set it down. He looked at Sandra, who was sitting very still at the defense table in a blazer that was doing no work for her today. Ms. Mercer, he said, I have before me evidence of an unlawful obstruction of a recorded utility easement, a pattern of fabricated violation notices, an unauthorized nighttime construction action involving heavy equipment on private property, a closed board session that authorized expenditures for which no legitimate authority existed, and a 3-year pattern of payments to a company whose registered agent is a member of your immediate family. Do you understand the gravity of what is in front of me? Sandra's attorney put his hand on her arm. She said nothing. The gavel came down with the kind of authority that doesn't require volume. Judge Alcott ordered a full forensic audit of the HOA's financial records for the prior 5 fiscal years, to be conducted by a court-appointed independent auditor. He ordered an immediate freeze on all HOA accounts pending the audit findings. He issued a permanent injunction confirming the utility easement's recorded status and prohibiting any HOA action affecting the corridor. He referred the financial documentation to the county DA's office for review of potential criminal charges, including breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent misrepresentation, and racketeering under the state's organized fraud statute. And he looked at Philip. Counsel, I'd recommend a thorough review of your client's exposure before you submit your next billing statement. Philip's $3,000 suit seemed to fit differently on the way out than it had on the way in. Patricia walked out of the courtroom beside me. On the steps, in the thin morning sunlight, she permitted herself a single, controlled smile. The audit is going to find more than what we submitted, she said. I know, I said. It usually does. The forensic audit took 4 months. It found more. CPM Services LLC had received, across 5 fiscal years, approximately $214,000 in HOA payments for services that either did not exist, could not be verified, or had been grossly inflated beyond any reasonable market rate. The county DA's office issued criminal indictments on 9 counts, including wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to commit fraud, for both Sandra Mercer and Douglas Mercer. 2 other board members accepted plea agreements in exchange for cooperation and restitution. The HOA board was dissolved by court order. A court-appointed administrator took over management of the community's legitimate common area functions, while the homeowners organized a new, resident-led governance structure, one with transparent finances, open meeting minutes, and bylaws reviewed by an independent attorney before adoption. On a Saturday morning in early autumn, about 24 neighbors gathered at the end of the main entry road, where the HOA's large gilded entrance sign had stood since the community's founding. It was not a mob. It was not angry. It was quiet and deliberate people in weekend clothes, some with coffee, a few with their kids. Someone had brought a cordless reciprocating saw. Someone else had brought a truck with a hitch. The sign came down in about 20 minutes. Evelyn stood at the edge of the group with her hands in her gardening apron pockets, and when the sign finally leaned and fell, she made a small, satisfied sound that I think was the sound of 3 years of accumulated tension leaving her body. I went back to the Creekside parcel afterward. I walked the property line slowly, east to west, the way I used to walk pipeline routes during the infrastructure years, checking each point, verifying each marker. The surveyor's stakes were still in place, orange flags bright in the autumn light. The utility easement ran clean and unobstructed down the eastern edge of the lot, the way it had for 37 years. The way it would continue to run long after everything that had happened here was a footnote in a county legal record. At the front gate, I replaced the lock, not a sophisticated one, not a biometric system or a tamper-proof enclosure. Just a clean, solid deadbolt, the kind that works because it was built well and installed correctly, and is operated by someone who knows exactly where their property line is and what rights they hold on either side of it. I had one last piece of business. In my hand, I had the HOA's original property stake, a painted wooden marker that Sandra's crew had driven into the ground on the easement strip the day they installed the fence. I had pulled it up myself the morning after the power company crew left. I had kept it in my garage for months, flat on the workbench, waiting. I drove it to the fire pit at the back of the property, near the creek. I lit it with a long match. The paint caught first, then the wood, and the whole thing went from solid to smoke in about 4 minutes. I watched it the way I watch everything, carefully, completely, without rushing any of it. The creek ran over the rocks behind me. The smoke went up into a sky that was the specific shade of blue that only appears on clear autumn mornings. The kind of blue that has no opinion about HOA boards or utility easements or fraudulent shell companies. It just exists, clean and enormous above everything. Here's my question for you today. When someone tried to take something from you legally, professionally, personally, did you stand your ground methodically? Or did you let it slide and regret it later? Drop yes in the comments below if you've ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours and refused to back down. And if stories like this one are your thing, documented, real, and satisfying right down to the gavel, then subscribe and hit that bell because we post every week. And the next one is already in the works. This was the Creekside parcel, and it is still mine.